This is not hate speech. I'm going to read to you today selections from a book that is even part of the collection at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Its author was a respected professor at the University of Maryland, and he worked as interpreter for the State Department, the Canadian Foreign Service, the World Bank, the IMF. Pretty respected guy. I'm just going to read to you selections from this book. I've been speaking about it for years, asking people to read it. I'm going to read some of it to you. I've read it many times, and I have all kinds of markings in the book, but I reread it recently. So here we go. The book is called Jewish Eugenics by John Glad, and it was published in the year 2011. We're going to start with the part from About Writing This Book. An ideological coup d'etat had taken place both in popular culture and in academia since my undergraduate days, and the new rulers were ferreting out even potential dissenters. In effect, ideology was dictating the resolution of scientific questions. So I resolved to learn about eugenics on my own, the best way to learn anything really, and eventually wrote Future Human Evolution, Eugenics in the 21st Century, which can be downloaded free in an ever-growing number of languages at whatwemaybe.org. This site has been visited more than 1 million times, and the book may well be the most popular book ever written on eugenics. Recognizing in Washington, D.C., where else, the crucial role played by Jews in intellectual life and politics, and by some Jews in the suppression of the eugenics movement, I resolved to go back to basics and create a chronology of the shifting Jewish viewpoints that have led us to where we find ourselves today. And, as the reader will see, the deeper I dug, the more I found. It is now indisputable that much of what might be termed accepted eugenics narrative is in crass discordance with the historical facts. A timeline is like a skeleton. As the pieces fall into place, the creature gradually forms and seems almost to peer back at us like a living being, gesturing toward our future from the past. And onto this scaffolding, we can grow the muscles, organs, and skin of our destiny. Writing books about Jews used to be a far easier undertaking than it is today, with Jewish anxieties over anti-Semitism having been so elevated as to render dispassionate scholarly discourse nearly impossible. Another problem is that the very definition of Jewry has become a moving target. After all, to write a book about Jews means to first come up with a working definition of who is a Jew, and that is no easy task. Formerly, Jews were considered to be the descendants of Abraham, and they believed in Judaism. Now both religion and Abrahamic lineage are off the board as generic definers. Aside from providing a few lists of persons with patently Jewish names, I have in all other cases relied on more weighty evidence of Jewishness. Thus, to cite but one example, even though the family name Titmus is indicated as a Jewish surname in the family tree of the Jewish people, I omitted Richard Titmus of the London School of Economics after corresponding with a colleague who had written an article about him. The surname Burt is both a Jewish and a Scottish name, so the famous psychometrician Cyril Burt is discussed in this text, but not as a Jew. In such cases, I chose to err on the side of caution with regard to others, leaving out 10 Jewish proponents of eugenics for fear of including even one non-Jew as Jewish. Second, the web that I cast inevitably had more rips and gaps than netting. Many Jews attach little significance to their Jewishness or are reluctant to have it known, sometimes even to family members. Third, there are people, not all of whose parents or grandparents were Jewish. Where does one draw the line? Are we going to revert to such lexical monstrosities as Mischling and Quadroon? I confess to being a dyed-in-the-wool universalist and instinctively recoil from such discussions as invidious, but have taken up the topic only out of sheer necessity. Considering the influence of the Jewish community in America, the mixed attitude of Jews towards eugenics and reshaping the human genome in a number of ways, more about this later, is far too important to be ignored. Many scholars and scientists would vehemently object to being labeled as Jewish geneticists, anthropologists, historians, etc., on the grounds that the adjective is parochial and even ghettoizing. Given the massive assault on the eugenics movement as a supposedly anti-Semitic ideology of genocide, however, historical veracity requires that the distorted image produced over the last 4 decades be rectified. The topic is not merely an important fragment in the rich and vibrant mosaic of Jewish intellectual history. Far more important, it will determine the survival of culture itself. The immense Jewish tragedy during World War II has received its due remembrance, and we are all in debt to those who preserved and preserve a memory of the victims. But when the inevitable distortions forged over the flame of despair pose a new and even greater threat to the future of humanity, and to Jewry in particular, the situation has clearly gotten dangerously out of hand. The famous geneticist and evolutionary biologist Theodore Dobzhansky commented, quote, "Human evolution has forced man to a crossroad from which there is no escape. The choice is between a twilight, cultural as well as biological, or a progressive adaptation of man's genes to his culture and of man's culture to his genes." End quote. If we, in the most fundamental fashion, fail to understand even the recent past, not to mention the present, how can we as a species ever hope to be worthy of the terrible price paid for our genetic patrimony in the form of natural selection? How deceptively banal the phrase now comes across to us. Or to cope with our responsibilities to posterity. This is not to say that eugenics, including Jewish eugenics, has not been on occasion abused in the most infamous fashion, and I attempt here to objectively lay out the actual facts, regardless of whose political ox is gored in the process. The greater part of this book is devoted to the microchronology. The immediate temptation was simply to gather instances of Jewish advocacy of eugenics. Some 400 are given here. But such a simplistic approach would have been repetitive and, frankly, tedious. Instead, I have attempted to present this fascinating jigsaw puzzle in all its dynamism and with all its relationships as a sort of Jewish Easter egg hunt. Join me and follow a bare-bones narrative that will overturn virtually everything you have previously absorbed about eugenics. These are authentic voices being allowed to speak for themselves as they wrestle with the ultimate questions of existence. Do not for a moment make the mistake of thinking that this is just one more recondite scholarly book devoted to the obtuse intersection of medicine and Judaism. Even now, the ideological struggle documented on its pages determines, to a huge extent, the ideologies underlying contemporary politics and the even greater topic of our ongoing evolution as a biological species. There are many who do not want the facts documented here to come to light. Public discourse has been molded by political realities. In Hans Christian Andersen's tale, The Emperor's New Clothes, a kingdom's naked ruler claims to be wearing clothing that is invisible to those unfit for their positions or incompetent, and everyone is intimidated into silence until a child exclaims, "But he isn't wearing anything at all." You are reading a book on a topic that supposedly not only does not exist, but one that is even inconceivable, a contradiction in terms. This misapprehension stands in gross contradiction to the grand tradition of Jewish culture and is the product of diligent propaganda manufactured by a heavily Jewish group that itself represents a small minority within the Jewish community. Frankly, their task was made easier by the fact that most people have only the vaguest notion of what eugenics is, not to mention realizing its enormous importance. The best way to expose propaganda is total honesty with the reader. So read the facts laid out here and judge this political catwalk for yourself. The bulk of the microchronology consists of verbatim quotes. This is the way it was and is, without manipulation. For all its excesses, eugenics has been an astounding, indeed an existential success for Jews, molding them into a uniquely resourceful and intelligent people, and the current assault on eugenics by an understandably emotion-driven minority Jewish faction represents a frontal assault on the very essence of Jewry. One facet of eugenics is that of cloning. Without any doubt, it will soon be possible to create future Da Vinci's, Beethoven's, Einstein's, Indeed, human cloning may well already be secretly investigated in Israel today. Legal specialist Carmel Shalev of Tel Aviv University writes that the parliamentary debate on cloning went almost unnoticed by the public and the media, and that the fear of playing God was a virtual non-issue in Israel. It is my hope that direct access to a multiplicity of ever-evolving cross-index ideologies will serve future scholars researching the topic. Obviously, there is more than one PhD dissertation to be mined here, but even more important are those individuals faced with excruciatingly painful, highly personal decisions regarding their future families, and also their religious and/or secular counselors. And then he goes on to say that he'd be happy to hear from readers, but glad passed away. Now I'm going to read just a quote that is at the start of the first section, The Way It Was and Still Is, framing the topic. Despite, perhaps because of, the growing threats of assimilation, intermarriage, and low birth rates, many Jews are writing about the Jewish future. Many more are thinking and speaking about it. The time is ripe for bringing our disparate ideas together in a collective enterprise devoted to devising a plan or plans of action to preserve the Jewish future. There is no reason why one of the oldest continuing human civilizations cannot turn to the newest of technologies to enhance its prospects for the future. For the first time in our long history, our survival is in our own hands and not in those of our enemies. And that's Alan Dershowitz in The Vanishing American Jew. We're going to jump ahead just for one little paragraph at the end of the section on Are Jews Jews? So we return to the eternal question, who then are the Jews? The problem with all these definitions is that they are barking up the wrong tree. The essence of Jewry lies not in any purported genetic preservationalism, but rather in its eugenic dynamism. By maintaining high barriers to genetic interlopers, but not excluding them entirely, a constant influx of high-quality genes was achieved, producing superior intelligence. The Jewish-British geneticist and eugenicist Redcliffe Solomon formulated the most accurate definition: an endogamous family. Jews equal members of a cultural and breeding alliance. Now we're going to read part of the section on Zionism. But the task of history is to portray the past accurately, not to hold up a distorted mirror in the hope of influencing the future. The bulk of Jewry consists of Ashkenazis who arrived in North America and Europe from the Tsarist Pale of Settlement and quickly overwhelmed their Western brethren by sheer virtue of numbers. The United States had accepted millions of them from the Russian Empire, actually starting slightly before the assassination of Alexander II in 1881, up to the beginning of submarine warfare in 1914. Burdened by centuries of discrimination, they were generally perceived as backward, sickly, bereft of culture, and prone to crime. Quickly, the new arrivals made the dismaying discovery that even German Jews, including German Jews in America, had been pursuing a far more assimilationist strategy than they, and that these Germans not only were uncomfortable with their Russian cousins, but were even inclined to consider the uncouth habits of the new arrivals in terms of deterministic explanations that presented inherited characteristics as immutable. In England, the Jewish Chronicle commented in 1880 that the new arrivals, quote, have the Russian habit of living in dirt, and of not being offended at unsavory smells and a general appearance of squalor. They must be taught some elementary lessons before they can be brought up to the level of their poor English brethren. End quote. In America, the Jewish Messenger sniffed that same year that, quote, there's a lack of refinement in true spirituality despite the exactness with which they adhere to their traditional habits. End quote. In Germany in 1897, the Zionist leader Theodor Herzl, in the infamous article Maus Shoel, went even further, describing the Yiddish-speaking Eastern Jews as, quote, something unspeakably low and repugnant, end quote. It was precisely this disdain on the part of many German-speaking Jews for their Yiddish-speaking cousins that stimulated the new exiles' attachment to Zionism and its promise of a restorative national home. They had, until recently, hoped to find refuge in the Russian Empire, then emigrated in despair, and now saw that they must once again move on to their quote-unquote historic homeland. Okay, so now still in the way it was and still is under euthanasia, a bill was drafted in 1932 by the Prussian Governmental Council before Hitler's ascension to power to lay the groundwork for selective sterilization in cases of heritable diseases. Although sterilization had been discussed for 20 years, the legislation took the leading German eugenicists by surprise, who were critical of it as counterproductive and inefficient with regard to genetic improvement. On July 14, 1933, the legislation was passed by the German Parliament, entering into force in 1934. But now it permitted sterilization against the wishes of the individual concerned, specifically for the surgical sterilization of persons whose offspring would have a high probability of suffering from physical or mental illness, of hereditary feeble-mindedness, schizophrenia, manic depressive syndrome, hereditary epilepsy, Huntington's disease, hereditary blindness, deafness, or severe physical defects, as well as severe alcoholism. No mention was made of race. From 1934 to 1939, an estimated 300,000 to 350,000 persons were sterilized. Most sterilizations were for feeble-mindedness, followed by schizophrenia. At the time, sterilizations were also being practiced in a number of European countries and the United States. Eugenic considerations did not play a significant role in the German debate. Rather, legislators misguidedly saw sterilization as a cheap alternative to welfare. The Catholic Church was opposed to sterilization, but the Evangelical Church supported it. The debate over euthanasia was launched by Karl Binding and Alfred Hoch's 1920 book, Legalizing the Destruction of Life Not Worth Living. The authors, a lawyer and a physician, put forward a strictly economic argument. While there may have been some eugenic relevance in the case of the sterilization legislation, the euthanasia question was, at most, peripheral to eugenics, since its targets were persons who were already institutionally segregated and in many cases sterilized, with limited opportunities for procreation. To their credit, German eugenicists vehemently attacked euthanasia proposals. In 1926, the eugenicist Karl H. Bauer, for example, stated that if selection were used as a principle for killing people, quote, then we all have to die, end quote. The eugenicist Hans Luxemburger, in 1931, called for, quote, the unconditional respect of the life of a human individual, end quote. In 1933, the eugenicist Lothar Loeffler argued not only against euthanasia, but also against eugenically indicated pregnancy terminations. Quote, we justifiably reject euthanasia and the destruction of life not worth living, end quote. And then just a little further on, there's a quote from Rabbi Susan Bulba Carvudo of Temple Bethel in Augusta, Maine. Jewish law does not regard a fetus as a child. A child is a baby that is born. Abortion, even late-term abortion, is not murder. According to Jewish law, an infant does not actually reach personhood until it is 30 days old. In the days when children commonly died soon after birth, the rabbis decided that parents of infants under 30 days old would be exempt from the requirements of mourning. The customs of sitting Shiva, avoiding celebration for 30 days, and reciting Kaddish for 11 months are not traditionally observed for infants under 30 days old. Wishing to spare expense to families, the rabbis even decreed that a funeral is not conducted for such an infant. Jewish law regarding abortion is very different from Catholic law, which considers life to begin at conception. Now, same main section, the way it was and still is, but now we're under Israel and reproductive cloning. Reproductive cloning is a technology used to create animals that are genetically identical just as are identical twins, who for the most part do not agree that their own existence is a monstrous event. The process entails the transfer of a nucleus from a somatic donor cell to an egg which has no nucleus. The reconstructed egg containing the DNA from the donor cell must be treated with chemicals or electric current in order to stimulate cell division. If the egg begins to divide normally, it is transferred into the uterus of a surrogate mother. The process has already been employed to reproduce tadpoles, camels, cats, carp, cattle, horses, mice, mules, sheep, and water buffaloes. A different technique has been used to clone rhesus monkeys by splitting the embryo at the 8th cell stage into 4 genetically identical 2-cell embryos. The first claim of a successfully cloned mammal dates back to 1979, when a professor of biology at the University of Geneva, Carl Ilmency, asserted that he had extracted the nucleus of a 4-day-old mouse cell by sucking it into a pipette smaller than the diameter of the cell, and then inserting the same pipette into a fertilized mouse egg, much the same technique used successfully today. When a colleague attempted to replicate the experiment and failed, Ilmency was accused of having falsified his research and forced to resign. The affair illustrates why so much of cloning research is conducted surreptitiously. The Scottish embryologist Ian Wilmot, who cloned the sheep Dolly in 1996, went through 277 eggs before succeeding, and some of the sheep were born dead or deformed. Since animals reproduced in this fashion can experience significant health problems, most reproductive scientists consider cloning unsafe for use on humans before it is perfected on animals. But there is no doubt that human babies could be produced today with existing technology. Despite enormous misgivings over potential genetic defects, in 2001, the Italian gynecologist Servino Antinori was quoted by the Italian news agency ANSA as saying human reproductive cloning would, quote, very probably, end quote, occur first in Israel, and the German news magazine Der Spiegel identified the venue as Caesarea, an Israeli coastal resort. Antinori was quoted by the Italian news agency ANSA as saying he would seek, quote, political and scientific asylum, end quote, in Israel if hostility to his project continued in Italy. But the Israeli Health Ministry said that cloning human beings was illegal in Israel and dismissed reports that a reproduction team planned to begin the first cloning of a person in Israel within a year. According to United Press International, Antinori told Italian television reporters he had helped 3 women become pregnant with clones, a claim his office confirmed. Quote, the pregnancies are progressing nicely, end quote. There is no evidence now that these pregnancies ever resulted in births, if they ever occurred in the first place. London's Sunday Times quoted the Israeli-American biotechnologist Avi Ben Abraham, a participant in the project, quote, people claim we are moving too fast. They are right. We are stretching God-given intelligence as far as we can. We are breaking the rules of nature, but our goal is to save lives and cure diseases, and we believe we will soon be successful, end quote. Now, we're jumping into the microchronology. This is the Easter egg hunt. All right. So in 1905, number 8, one of the members of the German Society for Racial Hygiene is the Jewish physician, anthropologist, and eugenicist Heinrich Wilhelm Pohl. The Society's finances are held with the Goldschmidt Rothschild Bank. In 1921, number 3, psychiatrist and eugenicist Schneur Zalman Zygmunt Bukowski, quote, for years, I have been occupying myself with the problem of Jewish nervous diseases and Jewish degeneration. It interests me as a doctor. It irritates me as a Jew, and it torments me as a Zionist. It is deplorable that we must mention here the habit common among Polish and Lithuanian Jews not to let a man remain a bachelor, even when he is sick, and may transmit the disease to his progeny. We must fight with all our means such a prejudice, which may cause a great loss to the nation. This must be especially noted by those who construct the future of the nation, the Zionists. The resurrection of the nation in its homeland will be possible only if the human material that will go there will be healthy. In this respect, it will be necessary to apply from the beginning strict means, like the law against immigration that has been introduced in the United States. It is of special significance that Zionists should learn to view marriage not as a personal act that one may handle as one's heart may wish, but rather as an important public act, on which depends the future of the race, the flourishing of the nation, and its hopes, the next generation. If there are reasons to believe that a marriage may produce sick children, this must be strictly forbidden. Zionists must be especially careful when they come to rebuild anew the life of the nation. It is necessary to make much propaganda in Palestine also against the notion of having only 1 or 2 children, which leads to the annihilation of the race. 1929, number 5. Rabbi D. de Sola Pool, quote, "At the meeting of the American Eugenics Society, I tried to indicate that the most noteworthy emphasis of Talmudic ethics was its setting up breeding for character as the paramount eugenic consideration. I recall that other peoples have more or less consciously bred for the physical qualities of the warrior, marriage within the caste, the samurai, the modern popular conception of a good marriage as a marriage for money, the eugenic optimum as indicated by Who's Who, etc. But so far as I know, the eugenic emphasis placed by the Old Testament, including Amos, and by the Talmud on moral character as the eugenic aim is unique. Perhaps in a complete and scientific history of eugenics, Moses, Amos, and the rabbis of the Talmud will be recognized as intuitive and extraordinarily influential eugenicists even before the days of Galton and Karl Pearson. In 1930, number 4, the Dresden Anthology, Hygiene in Jews, contains an article by rabbi and folklorist Max Grunwald entitled Biblical and Talmudic Sources of Jewish Eugenics, recommending on the basis of the halakhic work Sefer Chassidim 1097 that a man would do better to marry the daughter of a well-behaved proselyte than a Jewish woman from a bad family, for she will give him good children. Particularly to be recommended is marriage with the daughter of a sister. Grunwald points out that Jewry followed the principles of eugenics far before Galton discovered them and quotes Nietzsche, quote, "Only he who follows the voice of blood and conscience and is dedicated to the fate of the community will perceive in his life's goal as providing valuable future society members and constructive elements." End quote. Same year, 1930, number 5. Writing in Eugenics, a journal of race betterment, Austrian-born Jewish-American biologist Nathan Fasten of Oregon State Agricultural College provides a brief summing up of the eugenics movement. Quote, "The goal of the eugenicists is not to create a new race of people, but rather through educational, civic, and other means to develop a social consciousness which will result in the humane treatment and eventual elimination of the hopelessly crippled, diseased, and mentally incompetent, and at the same time increase the number of children perpetuated by the normal individuals constituting our present civilization." The eugenicist, contrary to the opinion so often proclaimed by many popular writers and orators, does not aim to establish a race of supermen, but rather a race of sturdy, intelligent, and healthy individuals similar to the large proportion of the human family now in existence. Most eugenicists believe that the factors of heredity and environment are both essential to the development of the physical and mental traits of human beings. End quote. Same year, 1930, number 6. Arthur Ruppin, head of the World Zionist Organization office in Palestine, writes in his 1930 to 1931 book, The Sociology of the Jews, that, quote, "In order to preserve the purity of our race," end quote, "Jews displaying signs of genetic defects should not have children. He maintains that Ashkenazic Jews are not Semites and considers Oriental and Sephardic Jews, whose Semitism he recognizes, as inferior. Ruppin finds a book by racial theoretician Hans Gunther in a Tel Aviv bookstore and comments in his diary, quote, "It brings on many thoughts that I had in mind for my own book." Jumping ahead to 1960, number 2. The capture of Adolf Eichmann by the Israeli Secret Service and his subsequent trial in Jerusalem the following year stimulates popular interest in the slaughter of Jewish civilians during World War II, and the term Holocaust begins to be used with regularity in the United States and Great Britain. Holocaust historian Tim Cole comments, quote, "The need for greater identification with the diaspora Jew was heightened by the growth of Canaanism among sections of Israeli youth during the 1950s. These Canaanites rejected any link between contemporary Israel and the diaspora Jews. Rather than identifying with the European Jews who had experienced the Holocaust, Canaanism identified with Israeli Arabs. Attended by 376 journalists from 50 countries, along with 166 Israeli journalists and observers, Eichmann's trial is filmed in its entirety by the U.S. film and television company Capital Cities. After the trial, the Holocaust gains broad acceptance as a topic." Same year, 1960, number 3. Linguist Ron Kuzar, quote, "The Canaanite movement proposed a radical alternative to Zionism. Their views capitalized on a radicalization of intra-Zionist tendencies, which were quite popular in the local Jewish community of the 1940s and 1950s, which idolized the healthy, tall, tanned, down-to-earth native Sabra Jew born in Palestine/Israel as the inverse image of the diasporic Jew. Having its early roots in European extreme right-wing movements, notably Italian fascism, it exhibited an interesting blend of militarism and power politics toward the Arabs as an organized community on the one hand, and a welcoming acceptance of them as individuals to be redeemed from medieval darkness on the other." Okay, next, 1966, number 2. Rabbi and leading expert on Jewish medical ethics, Moses D. Tendler, in an essay entitled Population Control, The Jewish View, quote, "Man has been granted a junior partnership in the management of this world. Imbued with the spark of divine intelligence, man is permitted, even required, to use his partnership rights to regulate his own affairs, on condition that he does not violate the bylaws of this God-man relationship that are formulated in the Torah. What if the present projections prove to be more accurate than those made by Malthus? We are told that at the present rate of increase in the world's population, 300 million tons of additional grain annually will be needed by 1980. This is more grain than is now produced by all North America. What guidelines have been set down for our instruction in this yet hypothetical situation? The Jew is a world citizen, as personally concerned with famine in India and China. However, the Noahidic laws, which serve as Torah instruction for all humanity, demand a proper sequence of actions. Before a Jew can support birth control clinics in overpopulated areas of the world, he must insist that there be heroic efforts made to utilize fully the agricultural potential of the world." 1967, number 3. Such differing Jewish historians as Jacob Neuser, Deborah Lipstadt, and Norman Finkelstein all note the significance of the Jewish victory in the Arab-Israeli War in establishing the Holocaust Memorial Movement. Journalist Judith Miller argues, quote, "There was nothing inherently exploitative in the Jewish push for monuments, memorials, and public tributes to the period of their most intense suffering, but the linkage of the Holocaust with campaigns to raise money and enhance support for the State of Israel marked the beginning of serious abuse and misuse of the Holocaust. American Jews discovered that the Holocaust could be used as a weapon not only for garnering sympathy at home, but also for insisting on unquestioning support for Israel abroad, end quote. Same year, 1967, under Jewish Advocacy of Eugenics, it's number 5. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists and the journal Bioscience publish an article by Jewish biologist Leonard Ornstein calling for a, quote, vigorously pursued conservative eugenics, end quote, intended at the very least to prevent genetic decline. Not only do the editors make no mention of the claim that eugenics supposedly was rejected by the scientific community decades earlier, they even stress that they are reprinting the article, quote, because they felt it deserved the attention of a larger audience of biologists, end quote. Number 6, same year, 1967. Rabbi Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg allows abortion following amniocentesis during the first trimester if the fetus is determined to have Tay-Sachs disease. Quote, if there is a strong suspicion that the fetus will be born physically deformed and suffer greatly, one can allow abortion prior to 40 days of conception, and perhaps even up to 3 months of the pregnancy before the fetus begins to move, end quote. Waldenberg also allows termination of pregnancy for Tay-Sachs disease up to the 7th month of pregnancy because the defect, the anguish, the shame, and the mental and physical pain and suffering of the parents are inestimable. Next, 1971, number 1. Genetic Laboratories, Inc. and Iatric Corporation announced plans to open frozen sperm banks in New York City, fulfilling the dream of Jewish-American Nobel Prize winner Hermann J. Mueller for a scientific human breeding program. 1972, number 1. American historian Kenneth M. Ludmerer describes eugenicists who supported Hitler's race policies as a minority within the eugenics movement and decries such views as a, quote, perversion of the true eugenic ideal as seen by well-meaning men deeply concerned about mankind's genetic future, end quote. 1973, under number 2, in response to an inquiry by the Association of Orthodox Jewish Scientists, AOJS, seeking guidance on halakhic parameters for Tay-Sachs screening, Rav Moshe Feinstein publishes a Teshuvah responsum, which reads in part, quote, it is advisable for one preparing to be married to have himself tested. It is also proper to publicize the fact via newspapers and other media that such a test is available. End quote on that. Next quote, the largest community-based screening program for Jewish genetic diseases, which was created and is maintained under halakhic parameters, is Shevra Dor Yeshorim Committee for Prevention of Jewish Genetic Diseases, Dor Yeshorim. A confirmed incompatible couple is strongly discouraged from getting married to each other. By not getting married, such couples are not faced with such difficult decisions as what to do with a fetus that is afflicted with a genetic disorder. End quote. 1974, number 2. Mucolipidosis 4, ML4, is first described occurring mostly among Ashkenazi Jews. Children with ML4 appear normal at birth, but develop signs of central nervous system deterioration during the first year of life. Sitting is delayed, and most people with ML4 do not walk. Motor and mental retardation are usually mild to moderate and are slowly progressive. Some patients may become more severely retarded in the 2nd or 3rd year of life. It may lead to blindness in later years. No effective treatment is available, but prenatal testing is available for carriers and parents of previous affected children. 1985, number 3. After losing 4 children to Tay-Sachs disease, Orthodox Rabbi Joseph Eckstein founds Dor Yeshorim to screen for recessive genes that disproportionately affect Jews. If 2 persons intending to marry are discovered to be carriers, they are encouraged to find new partners. Testing is later expanded to encompass Bloom syndrome, Canavan disease, cystic fibrosis, familial dysautonomia, Fanconi anemia type C, Gaucher's disease, glycogen storage disease type 1, mucolipidosis type 4, and Niemann-Pick disease. 1988, number 1. for the first time, a large number of books appear that stress the connection of eugenics with Hitler's Germany, including Race, Blood, and Genes, A History of Eugenics and Racial Hygiene by Peter Weingart, Jürgen Kroll, and Kurt Bazert. 1989, number 3. New York Times, quote, "At Auschwitz, it is inscribed in stone, 4 million people died in the Nazi camps. But Yehuda Bauer, one of the foremost historians of the Holocaust and a sworn enemy of those who deny its reality, says that the number of victims was less than half that. Why is Mr. Bauer, the director of the Division of Holocaust Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem's Institute of Contemporary Jewry, insisting that far fewer people, including far fewer Jews, died at Auschwitz than is commonly reported? A historian's first duty is to tell the truth, Mr. Bauer said, and in this case the truth is horrible enough. Exaggerating the number of dead at Auschwitz, he said, quote, would only be grist for the mills of the deniers of the Holocaust." End quote. A commemorative plaque at the camp claiming that 4 million people were murdered there is removed. The current plaque reduces that number to 1.5 million. 1990, number 3. Researchers at the neurology department of Hadassah University Hospital, Ein Kerem, find the genetic defect which causes Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, CJD, a very rare disorder similar to Alzheimer's, but affecting middle-aged people and killing them within months. This may be the first time a gene responsible for neurological disease has been discovered, and the nature of its defect defined in Israel. When asked if an abortion should be recommended because of a disease the unborn child may get at 50, Ruth Gabazon, one of the researchers responsible for the discovery, responds, quote, "We have asked the Ministry of Health to establish a committee to look into all the ramifications and give us guidance." End quote. 1996. Number 2. Oren Alperstein Gelblum, mother of a child with Canavan disease, a rare, fatal neurological degeneration that strikes children, mainly those of Eastern European Jewish ancestry. Quote, "I do believe that people should have the information and should know realistically what it is they're facing. It's a very private decision that people make who discover that they're carriers. I can tell them the very complex, difficult experience it could be to have a Canavan child, but the decision of what to do is a very private one. If I were in the position of being pregnant and I knew I was carrying another Canavan child, I would choose not to have another Canavan child. But that doesn't diminish the experience that I had with my child who passed away." End quote. Researchers think that 1 out of 40 Ashkenazis may carry the defective gene. Both parents must be carriers to pass it on. A child conceived by 2 carriers has a 50% chance of becoming a carrier and a 25% chance of becoming mentally and physically incapacitated. 1998. Number 2. Geneticist and Nobel Prize winner James Watson states that the time has come, quote, "to put Hitler behind us," end quote. Quote, "Those of us who venture forth into the public arena to explain what genetics can and cannot do for society seemingly inevitably come up against individuals who feel that we are somehow the modern equivalents of Hitler. Here we must not fall into the absurd trap of being against everything Hitler was for. Common sense tells us that if scientists find ways to greatly improve human capabilities, there will be no stopping the public from happily seizing them." End quote. He also charged Germany for not having purged its discredited geneticists, whom he accuses of bad science. Quote, "Those disposed to see a cloud in every silver lining have managed to cast doubt on research about the causes of impossible cures for genetic diseases prevalent among Ashkenazi Jews. Those Jewish spokesmen who challenge such research raise the specter that the research will give rise to theories about the genetic inferiority of Jews. But it is a dishonest use of history to fail to recognize the difference between racist Nazi eugenics and responsible scientific research to relieve human suffering. One can only hope that the Jewish community will prove more sober than some of its leaders, who imagine stigma and harm to Jewish self-image where none exists." End quote. All right. Same year, 1998, number 7. evolutionary psychologist Kevin MacDonald, quote, "There is an eerie sense in which National Socialist ideology was a mirror image of traditional Jewish ideology. As in the case of Judaism, there was a strong emphasis on racial purity and on the primacy of group ethnic interests rather than individual interests. Like the Jews, the National Socialists were greatly concerned with eugenics. Like the Jews, there was a powerful concern with socializing group members into accepting group goals and with the importance of within-group altruism and cooperation in attaining these goals. Both groups had very powerful internal social controls that punished individuals who violated group goals or attempted to exploit the group by freeloading. The National Socialists enacted a broad range of measures against Jews as a group, including laws against intermarriage and sexual contact, as well as laws preventing socialization between groups and restricting the economic and political opportunities of Jews. These laws were analogous to the elaborate social controls within the Jewish community to prevent social contact with Gentiles and to produce high levels of economic and political cooperation, corresponding to the religious obligation to reproduce and multiply enshrined in the Tanakh. The National Socialists placed a strong emphasis on fertility and enacted laws that restricted abortion and discouraged birth control. In a manner analogous to the traditional Jewish religious obligation to provide dowries for poor girls, the National Socialists enacted laws that enabled needy young couples to marry by providing them loans repayable by having children." Same year, 1998, number 14. Sociologist Barbara Katz Rothman, quote, "I'm not made of stone. My eyes fill when the childless woman cries out her need, when the mother keens over the body of her child dead of some genetic disease, when the young man watches his father die of a disease he and his newly born son share, linking them across generations and a family tragedy in far more than 3 acts. My children will not be led to genetic technology in chains and shackles, or crowded into cattle cars. It will be offered to them. It will be sold to them. So why am I so afraid of a technology that offers to solve so many problems? Why am I so profoundly skeptical? How can I explain, justify, and defend my sense of distrust?" End quote. 1998. Number 23. Rabbi Moshe Tendler of Yeshiva College complains that many Jewish newspapers have accepted advertisements seeking Ashkenazi families to study the biological basis for bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, fearing that such materials will reawaken the idea that, quote, "Jews carry genes that are polluting the world. That's the basis of eugenics. If you have a diseased gene, you owe it to society not to propagate that gene." End quote. 1999. Number 3. Tim Cole, former Paul Resnick resident scholar at the Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, quote, "At the end of the 20th century, the Holocaust is being bought and sold. $168 million was donated to pay for the building of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum on a plot of federal land in Washington, D.C. Millions of dollars more have financed memorial projects throughout the United States, ranging from the installation of Holocaust memorials to the establishing of university chairs in Holocaust studies. Steven Spielberg's 1993 movie Schindler's List netted over $221 million at foreign box offices and 7 Academy Awards. In short, Showa business is big business. End quote. Year 2000. Number 6. Norman G. Finkelstein, American historian and son of Holocaust survivors, launches a frontal attack on the Holocaust memorial movement in his book, The Holocaust Industry, calling much of it, quote, "worthless as scholarship. Indeed, the field of Holocaust studies is replete with nonsense, if not sheer fraud." End quote. Same year, 2000, number 12. Rabbi Byron L. Sherwin, quote, Whether genetics serves as a source of blessing or as a curse for humankind ultimately depends upon whether we use wisdom and humility in utilizing the knowledge and the power acquired through decoding the secret language of life encoded into our every cell by the author of life. Or, as the Talmud might put it, from the bee one can receive either its honey or its sting. Genetics may provide us either with hell or healing, but the danger of the sting ought not scare us away from the sweetness of the honey." End quote. 2001. Number 7. Alan Mintz, professor of Hebrew literature at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City, quote, "I found myself increasingly uneasy with the way in which works of Holocaust culture were talked about as if they formed a world unto themselves, possessing their own laws and poetics. The exceptionalist model is based on a conception of the Holocaust as an unprecedented event that transformed our understanding of the world and produced a literature that can be understood only internally and by reference to itself." End quote. Same year, number 13. Gideon Bach, head of genetics at the Hadassah Hebrew University Medical Center in Jerusalem, quote, "We now know that most, if not all, human disorders have a genetic background, and we're acquiring the tools to study, treat, and eventually prevent or cure them. Israel, with many inbred ethnic groups, has proven a rich human laboratory for genetic detectives. It's far easier to trace genetic anomalies in inbred groups with homogeneous pedigrees." Same year, 2001, number 18, under United States immigration policy. In an article unusual for its frankness, former Director of National Affairs at the American Jewish Committee, Stephen Steinleit, argues that the traditional Jewish support of unrestricted immigration may have, quote, "dire implications for Jews in America," end quote, and that many Jews are secretly terrified at the ongoing transformation into a non-white society. Quote, "Is the emerging new multicultural American nation good for Jews? Will a country in which enormous demographic and cultural change, fueled by unceasing large-scale non-European immigration, remain one in which Jewish life will continue to flourish as nowhere else in the history of the diaspora? In an America in which people of color form the plurality, as has already happened in California, most with little or no historical experience with or knowledge of Jews, will Jewish sensitivities continue to enjoy extraordinarily high levels of deference, and will Jewish interests continue to receive special protection? Does it matter that the majority of non-European immigrants have no historical experience of the Holocaust or knowledge of the persecution of Jews over the ages and see the Jews only as the most privileged and powerful of white Americans? Does it matter that most Latino immigrants have encountered Jews in their formative years principally or only as Christ killers in the context of a religious education in which the changed teachings of Vatican II penetrated barely or not at all? Does it matter that the politics of ethnic succession, colorblind I recognized, has already resulted in the loss of key Jewish legislators, and that once Jewish safe seats in Congress are now held by Latino representatives?" End quote. Steinleit predicts that, quote, "disproportionate Jewish political power," end quote, will erode in a few decades, that nearly, quote, 80% of the entire foreign aid budget will no longer go to Israel, end quote, that the United States may cease to tolerate, quote, "dual loyalty," end quote, or even accept Jews seeking refuge in the future. Steinleit is particularly concerned with the immigration of Muslim immigrants who regard the founding of Israel as a catastrophe. 2002. Number 1. According to Russian governmental statistics, 76.5% of migrants to Israel from the Russian Federation are not Jewish. Israel claims that only 57% are not Jewish. 2003. Number 10. An international group of geneticists studied the Y chromosomes of 3 Jewish castes, Cohen, Levi, and Israelite, in which membership is determined by paternal descent. they conclude that while 70% of the Kohanim, plural of Kohen, is also a relatively large percentage of the Israelites, each display their own similar chromosomal lineages. The lineages of Sephardi Levites and Ashkenazi Levites are genetically diverse. It is estimated that Kohanim and Levites each comprise 4% of the Jewish people. The team speculates that the non-Jewish introgression may have been accounted for by Turkic converts to Judaism from the Khazar Khaganate, located in the northern Caucasus, who fled westward from the Golden Horde and adopted Yiddish as a Slavic tongue relexified with a German vocabulary, possibly via Sorbian. The introgressors, the team hypothesized, may have numbered between 1 and 50 men. It is commonly accepted among geneticists that the Ashkenazi Jewish community started from a very small base, which as late as 1500 CE may have numbered only about 30,000 people. One of the principal researchers, Karl Scherecki of Technion and Rambam Medical Center in Haifa, comments, quote, "If someone has a non-Jewish haplotype, it doesn't mean that person is not Jewish." Same year, number 17. Historian Christine Rosen, quote, "If ever there was a clear case for using our knowledge of human genetics to end suffering, Tay-Sachs, a killer of children, is it. There is no cure for the disease. The question is no longer whether we will practice eugenics. We already do. The question is, which form of eugenics will we tolerate, and how much will we allow the practice of eugenics to expand?" End quote. 2005. Number 7. Robert Desnick of the Department of Human Genetics at New York's Mount Sinai Hospital writes that Tay-Sachs disease appears to have disappeared almost completely from among the Jewish nation. The blog Pythes Online comments, quote, "Tay-Sachs is mostly confined to a specific ethnic group, in this case Ashkenazi Jews. Tay-Sachs may also be the first genetic disorder almost totally eliminated by voluntary eugenics. Despite the intellectuals' disaffection with genetics, mounting scientific evidence eventually turned the tide in favor of the genetic basis of human behavior. Eugenics has been slower to recover and is still viewed by many as a dangerous, or at least publicly unmentionable idea. And yet eugenics, selective breeding, remains a simple idea whose effectiveness has been borne out by 5,000 years of agricultural and animal husbandry. The fact that the Nazis misused a particular scientific idea doesn't vitiate its validity." End quote. 2007, number 13. The newspaper The Forward publishes its annual guide to some of the more serious Jewish genetic diseases, which it attributes to, quote, "centuries of inbreeding," end quote. Bloom's disease, Canavan disease, congenital hyperinsulinism, dystonia, familiar dysautonomia, Fanconi anemia, Gaucher's disease, mucolipidosis type 4, Niemann-Pick, infantile Tay-Sachs, and late-onset Tay-Sachs. Quote, "There are about 20 Ashkenazic diseases, not counting the higher rates of at least 4 cancer-related genes." End quote. Same year, number 16. Eugenics researcher Yal Hashiloni Dolev of the Academic College of Tel Aviv, Yafo, Israel, quote, "In Israel, there is no wide and continuous discussion regarding the ethical issues involved in medical genetics. The Israeli legal system does not generally protect fetuses. Cost-benefit analysis related to genetic abnormalities is not ethically rejected in Israel. Regarding history, I showed that the start of applied human genetics in Israel after the establishment of the state in 1948 was not controversial. At the prenatal stage, non-tolerance toward the genetically deviant is the norm among Israeli genetic counselors. Abortion is not a controversial issue in Israeli politics. Israeli law permits abortion on the grounds of extramarital sex, which is based on the halakhic fear of giving birth to what religious law calls a mamzer. The Israeli Jewish fetus is not considered to be a life right from conception, and it has no rights. Egg and embryo donation, embryo wastage, surrogate motherhood, preimplantation diagnosis, sex selection, fertilization with sperm retried post-mortem are not prohibited in Israel. Wrongful life. Such claims have been rejected by the overwhelming majority of courts around the world. Thus, Israel is a world exception." End quote. Same year, number 17. An anonymous Israeli pediatrician counselor, quote, "You cannot imagine how sad it is to see a child plead for his death or have his parents ask you not to do everything to keep him alive. Such situations have made me sure that selective abortions are the right choice." End quote. And the last one, 2008, number 19. A 19-year-old Lithuanian Jewish Orthodox woman confirms in a sociological survey that a genetic disease stigmatizes the family in the eyes of the community. Quote, "This is well known. You do Dor Yeshorim so that the genetics will be good, so that you don't have children who suffer. I have in my class a friend with 3 brothers who are sick with cystic fibrosis, and she tells everyone, do the test." Question, is your friend married? Answer, no, and it is difficult for her to find a match. Since both of her parents have the defective gene, it is very difficult for her. People don't understand this. She will have to compromise. Question, how about you? Would you consider a match with such a family? Answer, no, I wouldn't. I know it's a stigma, but I wouldn't go for it because it's frightening. End quote.
It's called Getting Started with Crypto-Jewish Genealogy. I've made a short presentation and we'll cover a little bit, but you should know that basically you're going back to about 1381 or 1391, a good 100 years before the actual expulsion and a lot of the conversions. And 1391 was the largest moment in our history that Jews were converted. This collection is about the Jews that converted and became Catholics or other religions. Many are Catholics still today. And with this collection, they can trace their histories and you can be able to see how they migrated from place to place. Endogamy was rampant. Men marrying their nieces, first cousins marrying. This is a normal trait in crypto-Jewish families, and in mine, every single generation married a cousin except my mom and dad. Every single generation. So I have what's called a collapsed pedigree. So please understand that this wasn't something odd or weird. Oh my God. No, this is what happened. And a lot of it also happened in the shtetls. When you're looking at Ashkenaz genealogy as well, it happened in royal families. They didn't want to marry outside of the royalty. So basically, it is just something, and it is what it is.
Remember Jewish Eugenics, that book, which I still say you got to read. It's such it gave, I mean, it's not even it's not an anti sort of book. It gave me such I don't support anything that they're doing, but it gave me such like an empathy for them to learn about these different things that ail their children and them later on in years that they don't even know. So if they're working toward a goal to fix themselves, so it makes complete sense that they would need to nail how to modify biology and how to brew up the pieces and parts that they want, especially if they want to like reprint the best version of them that they want to have. But they need to fix themselves, and I'm not excusing what they're doing, but I'm trying to look at it like if their children are going to be just plagued by horrible things until they die, like, wouldn't people do anything for their family if it was your family?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I do sort of think we need to put the pitchforks down. I think that if we could maybe get people to understand that they're changing everything and they're changing you, but they're doing it for their reasons. And I'm not, but because they always shut you down, like your hate speech